Let's go to speak to Itamar Rabinovich, who is the former ambassador of Israel to the US and professor at Tel Aviv University. Great to have you on the programme. First of all, Ambassador, let me ask you, I was listening yesterday to somebody who's on this programme often, a former mediator, Oliver McTiernan, who's part of the Forward Thinking charity. He said this, he said, these hours to come ahead of Sunday, he said, essentially, this is a dream for anybody who wants to squander a deal right now. These are very nervous hours, aren't they?
This is a very nervous time, and there's still a lot of nervousness and tension to come, because the crucial day actually will be 42 days later, when the second phase needs to be negotiated, at which point Mr. Smotrich is probably likely to follow his colleague Ben-Gvir and leave the government and the coalition. Netanyahu would then be the head of a minority government, and he would find himself squashed between the pressure of Donald Trump and the pressure of these two colleagues of his. He is in a situation of a political predicament.
Do you see the first phase going ahead? Do you believe that even with what we've heard of the far right, as far as you can read it so far, that all the signs look like they are pretty much there?
Yes, the far right, has made its voice very clear. Mr. Ben-Gvir will probably leave the government. Smotrich will remain critical of the deal, but will not leave the government before we get to the second phase, 42 days later. But, we are in a war zone in the Middle East, and all kinds of events can take place that we do not anticipate. There can be sabotage activities. There can be, any type of fire from Yemen, from Lebanon, from Syria, from Gaza, a major event in the West Bank. All of this is not likely, but could happen, and could lead to problems with the deal.
Just while we're talking, Ambassador, I'm looking at images of Itamar Ben-Gvir, who gave a press conference earlier, spoke to reporters before the General Cabinet were meeting. Let's have a listen to what he said.
Yesterday I was horrified. Today, as more and more details come to light, we found out that they are releasing terrorists convicted for life imprisonment to Jerusalem, to Judea and Samaria, even though everyone knows these terrorists will immediately attempt to attack again, to kill again. I'm deeply distressed. I call on all my friends in Likud and the religious Zionist party. It is still not too late. Before the government meeting, this deal can be stopped. Join me. We can stop this.
How much do you put down this full steam ahead, as it seems at the moment, Ambassador, to President-elect Trump? How much of a factor was Trump in this? And I know we had, in the last couple of days, we heard President Biden ask a reporter when she asked the Trump factor, he said, is this a joke? What's your take?
No, it's not a joke. It's very serious. I think President Biden, whom I personally have very high regard for, and is a great friend of Israel, and stood by Israel in the first awkward days of the war, was just too mild in dealing with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And Mr. Netanyahu figured out that he could ignore his requests or suggestions. And Donald Trump, takes no prisoners. He sent a negotiator on his behalf who called Mr. Netanyahu and told him that he wants to meet him on Saturday at 10 a.m. Mr. Netanyahu said that it's a Saturday, he's not very comfortable, and he said, I will show up at 10. That's a different style, and unfortunately, this is a style that is more effective than the mild, gentlemanly style of Mr. Biden.
Yes, and I think that's a polite way that you've put it as well, isn't it, Ambassador? I think he said something on the lines, this is Steve Witkoff we're talking about, he reported of saying, I don't care if it's the expletive Sabbath, he needs to meet me this morning, and it appears to have paid off, as you say, because he did meet. Now we're in a situation where you said right at the start, the second phase is going to be the difficulty. Now they will start to discuss, I'm right to say, I think, the second phase, 16 days after the start of that 6-week first period of a truce.
Correct.
Remind me of the framework of that second phase, the key ultimately to Israeli soldiers leaving the territory.
Well, Hamas insists that the second phase should lead to the end of the war. End of the war, Israel fully out of the Gaza Strip, and Hamas remaining or coming back to power in Gaza, which would reflect negatively on Israel's major war aim, one of the two war aims, to bring back the hostages and to put an end to the military and political and administrative power of Hamas. If the war ends with Hamas back in power, it would be very awkward for the Netanyahu government.
The other point that I think is very interesting right now is just to look at the position for Benjamin Netanyahu. I mentioned this to Noga on his hold onto power. I heard one analyst in Israel, the Times of Israel, suggesting that if phase one goes ahead as planned, that's 6 weeks, and we see more than 30 hostages released, if we get to a point where they continue to be released, it may be that then the trigger is pulled on the Netanyahu government, and that he may be aware of this, that his time is running out. But those close to him appear to say that he's just concentrating on the now. He's got 6 weeks. This is enough time for him to work out his next move. Just tell me how you read that.
I would say 6 weeks from now, we may be able to know what the larger plans of the Trump administration for the Middle East are. If the plan is to try to go for a larger Israeli-Palestinian agreement and to make this the basis of an Israeli-Saudi normalization, if that happens to be the case, then of course the problems for Mr. Netanyahu would become larger because it would concern the West Bank. But the prospect of normalization with Saudi Arabia could be very enticing for him. And then if he has to go to elections, which may be the case, and run on the ticket is, I am the man who brought normalization and practically an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict, would be a very strong ticket for him.
Just a brief thought on whether you think there is a likelihood of a move led by the far right to try to, and whether it could be successful through Benjamin Netanyahu, and whether there's a vision, it may be hard to say, that there would be a return of some kind of settler movement or attempt of that, as we saw in the early 2000s from Israelis in Gaza?
Could be. There could be violence. There could be resistance. Today, actually, in trying to appease Mr. Smotrich and his constituency, the settlers, a third aim was added to the war aims, namely greater security in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank. So, you can never overestimate Mr. Netanyahu's political skills, and he's now fully concentrated on trying to survive this, bring it to an end, and remain in power. And I would not underestimate his ability to do that.
Your diplomatic experience is very useful on this final question to see if there's any chink of light or chink of possibility here. When the final press conference was had with President Biden alongside Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked by reporters, when will international journalists be allowed into Gaza? Will it be in the ceasefire period? Antony Blinken said he will do everything to make that happen. What do you think the likelihood of that happening is?
I hope that Mr. Netanyahu, the Israeli cabinet, will fully realize that if they really want to end this war with a victory, or at least a partial victory, an alternative source of power and administration has to be built in Gaza. And so far, they have refrained from doing that. But if during the next 42 days they move towards that, this would be a big game changer.
Ambassador, thank you for your time this evening. Really great to speak to you. Itamar Rabinovich, the former ambassador of Israel to the USA and President Emeritus of Tel Aviv University. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.